Hi, my name is Mark Ostrich and I've been doing agility for 10 or 11 years now. And most of my experience has been with scruffy mixed terrier rescues. First there was the Griff, then there was the Zana. And although I love those dogs, let's just say that scruffy mixed terrier rescues are not the most biddable or trainable dogs out there in the agility world. But I came to find out that you could accomplish a lot by just understanding the cues and how your dogs naturally react to those cues. I remember when I first started out, one of my first classes, we were taught the rap. Now you know the rap. Send your dog over the jump, you turn toward the dog turns toward you, and they follow you on the way back. No training involved, a total natural reaction. And that's what this entire series is about. Looking for dogs' natural reaction to cues so you can get them through a course without a lot of training. Now the first commandment is about converging. And in agility, converging means that as a handler moves toward a jump, it cues the dog to take that jump. So here's the chart right here. The handler moving toward the jump, and that cues the dog to take the jump. And note that the handler does not have to get to the jump. Just be moving toward it until the dog is committed to it. So by moving toward the jump, even if they don't get close, cues the dog to take that jump. Totally natural reaction. Now, how come this works? Well, have you ever seen your dog chase a squirrel? So let me add some labels to this chart. Okay, so the dog is out in the field and sees a squirrel, and the squirrel's running toward the tree, and the dog runs toward the tree where the squirrel is going, because dogs understand angles. Total natural reaction. Now this will become more clear to you as we go through the examples. Well, first let me note that this might not apply to you if you have really great trained behaviors. For example, in this chart here, let's just say the handler could just point to the jump and say, go. And 20, 25 feet away, the dog is going to go take that jump no matter what the handler does. Well, that's a great trained behavior, and that's better than what I'm talking about. But most people I know don't have that level of trained behaviors. Okay? With that in mind, let's go to the examples, and let's start at the start line. This is a fairly common opening. You got your 1, your 2 straight ahead, and then a hard turn to the left to the number 3. And let's just say, as a handler, you want to be somewhere over there, the number 3 jump, to do a blind or a front, whatever over there. So the question is, how do you get your dog over the number 1 jump when you're standing by the number 3 jump? And there are several options that may or may not work. The first might be a trained behavior. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about what you're doing in the ring that will naturally evoke a reaction of your dog. Okay, so let's talk about some cues. What if you point or roll your arm toward the number 1 and say jump? And that might get your dog over the jump as well. But in this situation, I've often seen, particularly with novices, where the dog runs directly to the handler, and that's because there's nothing in between the dog and the handler, and they have perhaps eye contact with some kind of connection, and the natural reaction of many dogs will be to run straight to the handler. So you have to cue in a way to overcome that, and the way I'm going to suggest is to converge toward the number 1 jump. Now in this case it would be you take 1 or 2 steps. You'll usually only take 1 big step toward it. Take a step toward the number 1 along with your other cues, and because motion is the strongest cue, you're adding the motion cue to cueing the number 1. That's converging, and that'll stronger cue the number 1 jump. So let's count up the cues right here. You got your arm, you got your voice, and you got your motion, the strongest cue. And that is perhaps the strongest cue package you can put together to tell your dog to take that number 1 jump when they might be inclined to come directly to you. Now I always say that If what you're doing is working, that's just fine. Let's just say the arm and voice works for you. But if you're in a situation where your dog is coming to you and not following that lead, then perhaps you need to cue more. And in this case, converging would be the way to cue more. Our second example, I could just call it a turnaround. You have 4, 5 in the back, and 6. If you didn't have the 5, it'd just be a 180. But you got to get your dog back to the number 5. And maybe you have a border collie with a lot of momentum coming over that number 4, and that momentum is going to carry it far enough back, and you do a little arm motion to get the dog over the number 5. If your dog doesn't have that momentum to get him back there, you need to keep moving directly toward that jump until he's committed to it, and then you can maybe use your arm to get him over it. But once again, you're converging, moving right toward the number 5 to get him over it. Now, this is a pretty lame example because that's probably what you're doing anyway. So let's just change this around a little bit to a more common situation, is a problem-solving situation, and that's our example number 3, which is going to be the save or correction. Okay, so we've spread things out a little bit. The dog needs to go over the 4, out to the 5, and then back to the 6. And because they're coming back to the 6, handlers want to get over to the 6 as soon as possible to do a blind or a front or whatever they want to do over there. And because they're trying to get ahead and are anxious, they often don't fully support the number 5. So when you see sequences like this, you're going to see lots of faults from people pulling away too early and pulling their dog away with them. This is a good pattern to recognize because, well, I like to call that number 5 the jump furthest out, which is kind of a reminder to make sure you fully support it so you don't pull your dog away. So let's say this happens to you. Now, the dog is going toward the 5, and then you're pulling away a little bit too early, and you see the dog coming with you, and you know it's going to miss the jump. So how do you make that correction? How do you get your dog back over the 5? The answer is you converge, which means you move directly to the 5. Now, some people might kind of move toward the 5, but a little more forward of that, like this. But that's not strong enough. You need to move directly toward the 5 to cue that, to get the dog back in. That's converging. That's your strongest cue. And you need to just go right at it, just like that. If there was ever an event that was custom made for converging, it would be AKC Fast. Because converging is mostly a distance thing, and AKC Fast has a distance challenge. We call it the SIN. And for those of you who don't know, you have that dotted line in the diagram, and the handler cannot cross the dotted line as it gets his dog over the designated jumps or whatever obstacles are in the distance challenge. In this case, the SIN is 4, 5, then you have to wrap and give the dog back to 6. How do you do it? Well, depending on the way the rest of the course is set up, you can get your dog to take that 4 maybe from the side or at an angle like the arrow shows. It could be a converging thing, not necessarily. But after they take the number 4, you have to get the dog to the number 5. Now, some dogs, through their focus and their momentum, are going to go to 5 on their own. Maybe with just a little encouragement for you, they're going to do it unless you screw it up. So arm, voice, or whatever, that may be all it takes. However, some dogs are very handler focused and might want to gravitate back to you on the other side of the line. They don't like being that far away from their handler. And if that takes place, you need to converge to the number 5 jump. So if you can get yourself maybe 5 or 6 feet away from the line and angle yourself converging toward the number 5, that'll be a stronger cue to get them there. Now when you get to number 5, it gets a little tricky because you have to do a wrap and the dog comes closer to you and you have to push the dog out. They're not already back as far as you want them to be to take that jump. You got to push them out there. Now whenever I do a wrap, not just in fast, When I do a wrap, I always like to take a step back to draw the dog with me, because that's sort of insurance to make sure they don't do a back jump. In fast, there's a dual purpose for that, because you want to step back, and not only are you pulling the dog with you, you're getting away from the line. So as you're stepping back, if you can get 5 or 10 feet, that'd be great. You pull the dog with you, and then you have room to converge to get your dog back to number 6. The more you go back, the better. You often have these kind of scenarios in fast, and getting used to getting away from the lines so you can converge in is a strong tool to be successful there. The next example is the big circle. This is a series of jumps, 3, 4, 5, or 6 jumps in a big arc, and you often see these in trials. Now, some people can just stand in the middle of the circle and point to each jump, and the dog will take it. That could be trained, that could be a natural reaction from the dog's momentum and obstacle focus. Some people run alongside their dogs, 3 feet away, 10 feet away, whatever. That might work too. But if you're like, the further are you away, the more likely your dog is to come toward you and miss a jump. So what do you do to keep your dog out there? How to get more distance and push him back into the line of jumps. And once again, I'm suggesting converging to each and every jump. Now, when I do a big circle, if it looks like my dog is not going to do it on her own, I'm going to converge to each and every jump. For example, let's change the chart. Okay? I'm going to converge toward number 7. And when the dog commits to number 7, which means I know she's going to take it, I pivot off my outside foot, that's the foot, toward number 7. And I turn my shoulders, I start running and converging to number 8. And when the dog commits to number 8, I'm turning and converging to number 9. So when I'm doing a big circle, I'm not really running in a circle. I'm running in a series of straight lines. And that's just another way to get more distance using converging. Well, that's the examples. There could be hundreds more. In fact, whenever I'm in a situation, particularly a technical situation, and I think my dog might miss a jump, I'm just going to move right toward the jump I think they might miss, because I know that's only going to help them take it. Now, I'd like to close this video with reference to a very special demographic in the sport, and I'm talking about the people who've been around a while, know how to train their dogs, but they can't get around as much as they used to. They can't keep up with their dogs. I'm kind of getting there myself. And so they're relying mostly on trained behaviors from a distance, and sometimes their dogs don't do exactly what they want and could use a little more guidance. And what I'm saying is that if they would just take a couple of steps toward the jump they want the dog to take, converge toward it, like I said, you don't have to get close. The motion toward it helps cue it. And the cueing the converging could only strengthen the trained behavior, give them a little more guidance. And of course, they can see the converging because they're looking at the handler to get the cues for the trained behaviors. So I'm saying this now because I have some great friends who are guilty of this, and they don't want to be told what to do, and I'm kind of getting that way myself. But if they just cue a little bit more and converge, they could only enhance their trained behaviors. So don't forget to converge, try it out, and don't forget to cue more. Thanks.
red,